Hi, my name is Ben Atkinson and welcome to the Functional Health Podcast. I interview some of the leading voices in nutrition and lifestyle medicine, and I will share with you their stories, their expertise and their advice, shedding light on the industry from each of their perspectives to help improve your health from today. This week, I'm delighted to share with you my conversation with Dr. Jen Unwin. Jen is a consultant clinical health psychologist based in the UK, and she works with the NHS helping patients manage chronic illness and achieve increased well-being. This was a hugely uplifting conversation, and I really hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So, without further ado, Jen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben.
It is a real pleasure to have you on the show. I was honoured to be put in touch with you through David.
No, not at all. I love these kinds of conversations, so it's just be a pleasure for me. Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. And we were just talking about something which I thought was quite interesting, which was coffee, because I'm currently drinking a caffeinated coffee, and you've got decaf. And do you have an aversion to caffeine? Yes,
I think I do. So I've always really liked. I love the flavour of coffee, and I loved drinking caffeinated coffee. But I think I'm one of those people. There are some people who don't metabolize it as fast as others. It's a sort of genetic thing, I think. So I did notice, because it has quite a long half-life, doesn't it? So if you have a strong coffee and then another strong, and I like it strong, another strong coffee, it kind of builds up, that caffeine's building up in your system, and I would occasionally feel a bit jittery or maybe have sleep problems. But really the main motivation for me is I have a tendency to migraine. Mm-hmm. And I'm always looking for things that, it is much, much better now. It's very rare for me to get them now because of lots of lifestyle things that I've done. But I had to go for a little procedure, and they'd asked that we didn't drink coffee. And so I hadn't had any coffee, and it was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I had the worst, it was a terrible, terrible headache. I could barely function. David had to drive me to the hospital to get this thing done. And then I had a coffee straight afterwards and felt completely fine. So I thought, I'm a little bit, I'm obviously too susceptible to the effects of it and quite addicted to it. So I cut it down slowly. And even so, the last little bit was really hard to give up. And I got a lot of really horrible symptoms like crushing in the chest. I'm not a panicky person at all, but sort of panicky feelings, depressed. It was really grim. But once I was through the withdrawals, I've been fine, and I haven't noticed any difference. So I function completely fine without caffeine, like every human being ever did back in the day. Before it was discovered. And now I have decaf because I do quite like the flavour. So that's quite a long answer, but I think it might be useful for some people to hear that, it is possible to live without caffeine in
coffee.
You function completely well, and I'm much steadier, and I have fewer cravings for foods, and my energy is much more level than it was sort of up and down like you get with caffeine. And as I say, headaches better, sleep better. So on balance, I've kept to it.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I've never had a problem with sleep with caffeine. I think genetically I'm a fast metabolizer. So I think that plays a part. But yeah, you're right. But people should be able to function without it. And right now, I have to say, I probably can't function very well without caffeine. And that is an addictive thing, isn't it?
It's an addictive thing. It doesn't quite work in the same addictive way as some of the other things we're probably going to talk about today. But it blocks your tiredness receptors, doesn't it? That's how it works. I kind of looked into it when I was going to give it up. So I'm sure that's not a great thing. I'm sure tiredness signalling is a good thing we should be paying attention to. And, that where we're looking at things like, burnout or people getting very anxious or sleep problems, it's not a great idea to block your tiredness receptors. You should be responding to those signals from your brain and body, and in kind of taking care of yourself. I think it's a kind of modern phenomenon where we feel it's important to kind of keep going, power through the caffeine, and that's it's probably not, is it, when we think about evolution and our bodies and brains are in this lovely balance if you just leave them alone.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I always feel that, though. I like function normally at a certain level, and I always want to function slightly higher than that level. So I feel like, but now, because I've been, consuming coffee and caffeine for so long, that normal level is caffeinated. Do you know what I mean? So exactly. I'm probably not getting any real benefit from that anymore in terms of like cognitive performance, or I know it works for exercise as an ergogenic aid, and that's probably not affecting me anymore.
Because like all things, we're in homeostasis, aren't we? So the body's going to push back. Yes, and it probably means I'm more tired when I experience tiredness. I think that's the case. I think it's a sort of it's that trap that we get into with anything addictive. You do it because it makes you feel better in the short term, but actually in the long term, what are the effects?
Yes.
And I'm really interested in that, and how you help people out of that trap.
Yeah, and we're going to dive into that later. But just to stay on coffee, I don't want to make the whole podcast about coffee.
No, you can. That's fine.
I certainly didn't plan to. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because coffee has, well, from the scientific literature, it seems to have lots of beneficial effects. Caffeinated coffee as well as decaf, but a lot of the work's been done uncaffeinated. And it seems to be beneficial for the liver and all sorts of things. But yeah, that kind of substance addiction element is a real problem. And I think people are probably not masking their chronic fatigue through their consumption of coffee. So maybe masking some underlying dysfunctions, if you will. Which, I'm thinking about these now. I'm thinking out loud.
I think it's, just before we got on, we were chatting about the uniqueness of human beings, weren't we? And I think, unfortunately, yes, we read that stuff, don't we? Like, a glass of wine's fantastic for everybody. A coffee is brilliant for everybody. And that's not true. It's just not true, is it? Because we're all so unique that say that in terms of my chemistry and my, this sort of propensity I have for migraine that I got from my mum, it actually isn't great for me. So, that you always have to take any of those sort of an experiment. I do a lot on myself. David and I do a lot of sort of self-experimentation with things like caffeine or alcohol, or I don't drink alcohol either. That's another thing I experimented with giving. I never was much of a drinker, but I experimented with giving up, partly because, again, headaches, but also food cravings. I know we're going to talk about that, but that really does act in the reward center of the brain as the same way as other drugs of addiction, but also sugar. So I thought, I'm actually going to try just completely giving up alcohol to see. People are going to think I'm such a clean living person. But I'm going to do an experiment to see. And I experimented, and on the whole, I felt better. So I've never gone back to it. So it wasn't somebody saying, you should give up this or you should give up that. It's like you're saying, you want to be at your best. You want to be functioning at your highest level. If that's your goal, try some stuff out. Give it a good, obviously with alcohol and caffeine, you have to give it a good go, like a month or something. Dairy, other things like that. You can just give it a go and see for you personally, because you're your best data. Nobody can falsify your own observations of your energy, sleep, weight maintenance, mental health. All of those things don't lie for yourself. So,
and that comes, it's like personalized nutrition and personalized lifestyle, isn't it? And because you can look at like an intervention and it can benefit the vast majority of people, but then if you're one of those people where it has a negative effect, then it has a negative effect. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter if it benefits those of people. It might benefit them, not you. And that's something that we should address as well. Sorry.
Definitely, that data's lost in big meta-analyses or these massive studies where they're just associational, really, where you fill in a food questionnaire, but they've asked absolutely thousands of people. those individual variations are masked within that. There will have been people who didn't benefit from red wine or whatever it was, but it's hidden in the overall averages. And none of us are average, are we? We're all incredibly unique.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, let's go with that. We're all incredibly unique.
Yeah.
No one is average, you're right. No one
one's
is banging.
average. You know, different ages, genders, genetics, cultures, psychology. It's not just about the physiology when we're talking about, you know, what people should and shouldn't eat or exercise or, you know, whatever the advice is. It always has to take into account a person's preferences and then have a go and see if it works. It's always so annoying when you have a go and it doesn't work for you and people kind of think, well, you didn't do it right, or you didn't, you know, they want to sort of hold on to their position of, I don't know what it is, whole grains are good or whatever.
Yeah.
Or coffee's fine. You know, I don't mind if anyone else drinks coffee. No, that's great. I'm just not going to. You don't need to feel threatened by it. The same way, you know, I'm not going to eat sugar. You know, and people can get really defensive about that, or carbohydrates. You know, I don't mind what you eat, but this, you know, I'm talking about my own personal experience, and nobody can challenge that. That's the final arbiter.
I love that. Your background is quite different to David's in the sense you're a clinical psychologist. What led you to the field of working with chronic diseases and also lifestyle medicine, I guess?
Great question. So I worked for over 32 years as a clinical psychologist in the NHS, but I specialised in health from the beginning. I was always really interested in that intersection between psychology and healthcare, psychology and illness, psychology and wellness. And I worked in some of the big hospitals in the northwest of England here, with people with sort of varying conditions. So some of the chronic conditions like, well, chronic pain was a big one, but also things like diabetes, chronic lung disease, etc. But also with some of the acute care departments. So the plastic surgeons, that was a really fascinating group to work with. You know, so trauma, but also cancer care, you know, where people are having disfiguring surgeries, things like that. Yeah, so I've always been really interested in the health field. And then about 10 years ago, David and I were talking about a possible collaboration because we'd never actually worked together on anything.
Yeah.
So that sort of, then I discovered the whole low carb, no sugar thing for myself. So that's my own personal journey.
How did you discover it?
Right. Well, I just picked up, it was one rainy January day, and I picked up a book in Morrison's in the remainder bin called Escape the Diet Trap. And it was by Dr. John Briffer. It's still in print. He's a...
I have the book.
You've got it? Yeah, GP. I read this book. I've been a lifelong dieter, looking back, sugar addict, weight on, weight off. Never could, you know, always felt so confused about it because, you know, obviously I'm a competent person. I was a professional. We had a family. You know, most things in my life were kind of organised and, you know, successful. But I just couldn't crack this one thing around weight and managing what I ate, and I tried to follow all the various things and did all the, you know, did the Weight Watchers and the Slimming World. And anyway, people listening will identify some of them, I'm sure, with that journey. So, you know, January comes around and I see this book and I think, oh, yet again, you know, I need to find something. And lucky for me, that was actually the final piece in the jigsaw. I really understood what he was saying about carbohydrates being sugar, and, you know, the effect that sugar had on you. I really understood the sort of physiology. I could completely get that. And I kept reading things out to David as well. And so that was the sort of, and some other things were the basis of us working together to help the people with pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes in his practice to reverse that without drugs. And that's, I guess you've had him on the podcast, so you know that story.
Yes.
How it's been so successful, and there's well over 100 people now who've got type to reverse or without drugs, and they're maintaining it because we support them long term. So that went on. And then I became quite passionate about this whole idea of sugar addiction and food addiction. I trained with Bitten Johnson in Sweden, who's, you know, the recognised sort of international clinical expert on this. It's part of my own story. I retired from the NHS 2 or 3 years ago, and have devoted myself to this, you know, this work now, and I'm helping people with that. So I run groups with a nutritionist, and we run weekends. We've got a conference coming up May the 20th, part of the Public Health Collaboration. If people want to look for tickets, go to the Public Health Collaboration website.
I will link to that in the show notes for everyone.
That would be fantastic. We've got a 4-day intensive and then a one day conference. So yeah, it's something I'm really keen to spread the word about and to help people, because I think there's an incredible amount of unnecessary suffering for those of us who have this. Again, this, you know, it's not everybody, but those of us who have that tendency, there are lots of things you can do to get in a better place.
Yeah, and even for people where they might be able to maintain a good HbA1c level, right? Your average blood glucose level over 3 months or something like that. So it doesn't seem to be a real problem for them. I was in this position, right, where all my blood markers were good, but I would have like what I'd consider like unstable blood sugar fluctuations throughout the day. So it would just dip below baseline and get a bit shaky or have cravings and things of that nature. So what I've realized is having a low carbohydrate breakfast most of the time suits me very, very well. And I don't have cravings or anything like that. Stable mood, stable blood sugar, and like my cognition is better. And I find like if I eat too many carbohydrates, I become lethargic and all these different things. So I became quite biased towards this movement in a way. But I also know people on the other side which function very well with a high carbohydrate diet, and they too can maintain their blood sugar levels. They don't have cravings or anything like that, and they eat 2 to 3 times a day. So yeah, it's interesting, and it comes back to the point of bioindividuality, right? So we're all slightly different, and therefore we will probably all probably all benefit from different diets and different macronutrient profiles.
Yeah, totally. It's so individual, isn't it? Yes, it's not everybody. Some of us are more sugar sensitive, let's say, and we get these ups and downs, or you know, we get this sort of real emotional attachment to sugars and carbohydrates because for various reasons that we'll probably discuss, they make you feel better temporarily. They can make you feel better temporarily. So there's that, and then there's also the thing about, I think a lot of people don't have, I mean, I'm not a nutritionist, so I don't want to kind of speak out of turn, but this is just what I've noticed, and David and I have been talking about this recently. You know, you do need a certain amount of, the things that are essential are protein, so essential amino acids and essential fatty acids, so that the way that the body runs, you need a certain amount of fat, otherwise you die basically, wouldn't you, if you didn't have any? That's rabbit starvation. You need a certain amount of protein because obviously you're replacing things all the time, like, so the HbA1c is based on, they do it over 90 days because that's the time your blood replaces itself. So blood cells have a 90-day lifespan. So if you want to see how sugary your blood has been, you might as well wait until you've got a new, in a sense. And so our bodies are replacing themselves all the time, and you can't make blood cells out of cornflakes. you need protein, and I think one issue that I do see with people who have a lot of appetite problems and craving problems is that they've not got the base nutrition of the things that the body really wants and craves, which is the essential fats and the essential proteins, you know, that we need for our hormones and once you've got those, then I think there's variation in how much you can flex, you know, whether it's actually more protein that you eat on top of that essential amount, or whether it's you then adding in, you know, the complex carbohydrates. I don't think anybody benefits from high sugar, highly refined and ultra processed foods. I can't believe we're not designed, we didn't evolve to have those, you know, the necessity for our bodies to respond to Mars bars, basically. I mean, you use any example you like, that's not a natural thing that we're asking our bodies to do. So I love to look at this through an evolutionary lens. Yes, some people can get away with that more easily than others, psychologically and physiologically, for a while. But we all know we've got lots of patients who are normal or underweight, who thought they were getting away with eating like that, but who actually their metabolism was getting shot. And of course, as a young person, you'd never have a test which would tell you that your metabolism's on the slide. You just think, I look fine in my 20s, you know, people in their 20s and 30s on the whole, you know, they look fine. It's easier for them to manage the weight, so they might not be overweight, but, you know, who knows what's going on. So I'd caution people who think they can get away with a really high sugary, processed foody, you know, refined carbohydrate diet, if they're not having enough fats and proteins to keep repairing the body. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is kind of this is me talking as I sort of understand it. I'm not giving people advice as a professional, because I'm a psychologist, not a doctor or a nutritionist. But
it's interesting to hear your perspective.
Yeah, for me personally, that's how I understand it. You know, are people getting away with it? Maybe they are, but then, you know, your metabolism tends to hit the skids in your 40s and more in your 50s. So you may be storing up trouble. But yes, yeah, I mean, everybody's so different.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there. And in terms of a food addiction element, it's quite interesting. When you say food addiction, I'm guessing there's specific foods that you're referring to.
Right, yeah. So what we'd say is, you know, for most people with that problem, with the food sugar addiction problem, it's obviously sugar in all its glorious forms, of which there are many these days, because they keep renaming. If you look on food labels, they keep renaming sugar as things to, you know, like a smokescreen, maltodextrin and things like that. People don't know sugar. So sugar in all its forms, grains, nearly always any kinds of grains, and ultra processed foods. Most people with a food addiction problem will do, you know, so much better if they manage to eliminate those things from their diet. Some rock bottom food addicts, of which I'm one, have to be a little careful with a couple of other things. Well, sweeteners is another one. That's not really a food, is it? So sweetness is another thing that we struggle with, because it lights up the same rewards part of the brain, and it keeps that sweet kind of, you know, that sweet taste flavour, you know, being used to it sort of thing. That's the problem with sweetness. But the other two things that some people have a problem moderating are cheese. And that's probably because it might be to do with the fact that sometimes the proteins in cheese turns into casomorphines, which is a morphine-like substance. So for some people, that's a vulnerability. But also nuts. And the thing with nuts is that they're pretty unique, and dairy is pretty unique in having that combination of fat and carbohydrate, which we love. The fattening food, you know, get fat for winter, nuts. Dairy, you know, dairy is basically a fattener for baby animals.
Yeah, because it works through multiple mechanisms, I guess. Dairy, milk in particular, really, because it's got that carbohydrate, fat, protein, as well as it's very insulinogenic. So it spikes insulin more so than the carbohydrates that are actually in it. So if you took the carbohydrates in isolation, it wouldn't spike insulin as much. It seems to be, I don't know the properties, but I think it's like to do with potential hormones in dairy as well as the casein and whey combination, which are the proteins.
You want, but it's to grow baby cows, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so you want them to be hungry, and you want them to, baby cows, you want them to eat all the time. You want them to spike insulin because it's a growth hormone at the end of the day, isn't it? So, so dairy can be problematic for some people in terms of moderation, as can nuts.
Nuts are interesting because sorry, I keep interrupting you.
That's okay. Go ahead. No, I finished there. Nuts can be problematic, and again, particularly if you were to put salt on them, because the holy trinity is salt, carbohydrates and fats together. Human beings go mad for that, and that's what the food manufacturers exploit. If you think of all the things that they're trying to sell us, like pizza, donuts, they all have fat, sugar and carbohydrate in them.
Yeah, they're trying to have that magic combination. I loved, I can't remember who said it, but it's like stuck in my mind. So I think it was either a conference or a podcast. Someone was saying, you'll eat raw almonds until you're full, but if you honey roast those almonds and salt them, you're going to eat them until your arm gets tired. And I was like, it's such a good point, because I've definitely been there, whether I'm in the cinema or something, and someone's got those honey roasted salted almonds, and I've just eaten nearly the pack, and it's 100 grams, meaning it's probably 600, 700 calories, and it doesn't feel like I've eaten anything.
I'm literally salivating now you've said honey roasted. Honey roasted almonds. I was picturing myself there. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to moderate those. So one of the hallmarks of this food addiction problem is, you just can't moderate. So you might say to yourself, right, I've bought those biscuits. I'm just going to have one because I'm having a cup of tea, and it'd be lovely to have one biscuit. And then, completely out with the control of your logic and your will, you eat half a packet, or probably in my case the whole packet. And then afterwards you're like, why did I do that? It's almost like you're sort of driven, you're driven by this sort of primitive part of your brain that overrides the frontal lobes. And that's part of what happens, with the salted nuts or the cheesecake or whatever it is. You think, I'm sure people have had that experience where you think, I'll just have one slice of that lovely looking birthday cake that someone's brought into work. And then when nobody's in the office, you nip back for a second slice.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I am that person, right? So like you, I am also like that. But I know people, my partner, for example, is the one that can open a packet of biscuits, have one, and then wrap them up and put them away. You see, if I do that, amazing. I am eating 5 or more, and Correct. Then I might not put them away. So that is like...
No, that is so interesting. And yes, there are some people like that. There we are. And my mother-in-law's the same. And it always amazes me. I'm always like, how do you even do that? I can't do that. So looking at all the prevalent studies, there's been a few. And if we take a sort of conservative estimate, it's probably 8% of the adult population have this problem with moderating foods, this food addiction problem. But that's 4.3 million people in the UK.
Yeah, that's a big number.
And it's not a properly acknowledged problem. Probably because it's in some sectors' interests that it doesn't get acknowledged as a problem. I really believe it is a particular diagnosis. And because it's not acknowledged, there's very little research on how you help people. So that's what I'm really interested in doing. That's what myself and this nutrition colleague are doing. We're sort of running our own study of if we do this, do people, can we help people? And the other thing is there's no services. So what happens if you're listening to this podcast and you think, right, I might have a food addiction problem. I really identify with that. And you go and tell your GP, unless it's David or someone else who's heard me speak, they're going to go, oh, I don't think food can be addictive, but let's send you to the eating disorders service, right? And then you'll probably wait a long time because the eating disorders services are really, under a lot of pressure. Mm-hmm. I wonder why. But on the whole, people in the eating disorders services, they work with bulimia, anorexia, but they don't on the whole, think that food's an addictive substance. So their treatment is a moderation-based treatment. Like, you should learn to eat a bit of everything in moderation. Is the goal of most eating disorders treatments. I hope I'm not sort of oversimplifying it. Mostly they don't work with food addiction. Moderation is never going to work for you or me. Never, because we can't do it.
Yeah, I wish that was, because I'm willing to try. If someone has a protocol of like trying to get me to eat in moderation, I would love that, right? But I don't think I can do it. It's been about a decade of me trying.
We've all been told since childhood, and that's the standard advice is a little bit of this and a little bit of that. That really benefits the food industries, because people like you and me never do a little bit. We do a lot, and then the final point is that, so you might get sent to you might get sent to an eating disorder service, or when that doesn't work, or if that isn't available locally, you might get referred to, possibly an addiction service, but they focus on alcohol and drugs. They're not trained to deal with food addiction, and it's a different thing, because you can live without alcohol and you can live without drugs. You can avoid them, but you can't avoid food as a category, and eating. So we all have to eat, and we'll have to eat food. So it makes it a really difficult challenge to work with. Or you might get referred to the mental health services. Those are the only three options, and mental health services wouldn't have a clue, because they don't combine this overlap between physiology and psychology and food and so on. So really, apart from going online and finding yourself like a group or a practitioner, or following people like me, reading my book, Profits to the PhD, Fork in the Road, there's very little actual help out there for people. That's what I'm really passionate about now, is getting the word out, trying to get this condition recognised in the ICD and the DSM as an actual disease or condition, that warrants research and warrants the setting up of appropriate services for people.
What did you say that EDSM?
So the ICD is the International Classification of Diseases, and it's hosted by the World Health Organization, and it's a classification system for all recognised illnesses and conditions. And then the DSM is the Diagnostical Statistical Manual, and that's hosted by the American Psychiatric Association, and it's got all the sort of mental health and psychiatric type conditions including all the addictions, mental health problems and so on. Neither of those classification systems currently recognises food or sugar addiction as a recognised condition.
Right. Okay. That's massively fascinating. I've got a couple of questions. I want to move on a little bit to like barriers to change and kind of interventions in a second. But you mentioned before the 8% number of people have an addiction, food addiction. Can you map this, or has it been mapped against chronic disease prevalence?
Oh, wouldn't that be great? So, yeah. Oh, someone should do that for sure.
Well, I was going to ask if you were.
Yeah. So let me think of what kind of research we've got. So obviously, not surprisingly, in type 2 diabetics, you get a higher prevalence. In people with mental health problems, you get a higher prevalence. In people with obesity, you get a higher prevalence of food addiction, because obviously food addiction is people will tending to be eating the sugar and the refined carbs and the ultra processed food. So they're going to be vulnerable to those conditions that are worsened by that kind of diet. So chronic pain, type 2 diabetes, obesity, mental health problems are all linked there. So I suppose that research is out there, yes, for sure.
Okay. Oh, right. Fascinating. I think I've given myself some homework there, because I need to look into that.
I can send you some. I've got an EndNote library willing to share. I don't know if you've got an EndNote library of your own.
I do. Not an EndNote library. What do I use? Mendeley, I think it's called.
Oh right, so I can't share you my EndNote library.
Well, I will start EndNote in order to have access.
Yeah, do that.
100%. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Welcome. You're welcome.
And we've mentioned food addiction, and there's also actually going back to a talk that I heard you do at a conference. I can't remember the name of it, unfortunately, but it was on YouTube, and you used the Crave assessment tool. Could you explain that and how it's used, and maybe how you use it in practice?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So, right. So there is a questionnaire that's used a lot in research called the YFAS, the Yale Food Addiction Scale. And that's the one that's used to do all the prevalence studies and blah, blah, blah. But it wasn't really developed to be used in the clinic necessarily, or to be easily scorable, or to be kind of, it was sort of designed for research purposes. Now it is used clinically, but there are a few issues. It tends to sort of underdiagnose people. And anyway, so myself and this colleague, Heidi Yaver, thought it would be good to develop a tool which is based on the criteria for addiction in the ICD that I've just described. The ICD has 6 criteria for diagnosing someone with a substance use disorder, is what they call it, substance use disorder. So that would be alcohol or drugs. Mm-hmm. But when you go through those 6 criteria, they apply so magnificently to these issues we've been talking about with food and sugar. So we've tweaked the questions so that it reflects those 6 criteria, and we managed to squeeze it into the mnemonic craved, so that that people could remember it, and we could develop a simple questionnaire that professionals could possibly use in the clinic to screen. So it's, if somebody has 3 or more of these symptoms, it's really likely that they're struggling with a food addiction problem. So I'll run through them, and then you'll see how well they apply. So C is for compulsion, and that's that thing we were talking about where, despite your better intentions, you're driven to consume these things. So you might be sitting on your sofa, reading your book or watching the telly, and suddenly you're sort of consumed with thoughts about that half-open packet of biscuits that are in the cupboard, and you think, right, I'm not gonna have that. No, I've said I've had enough of that today. And you sit there, and 5 minutes pass, and then you're still thinking about that pack, and you think, oh God, and you're kind of driven to, that feeling of being driven to consume when you wouldn't really want to. R is for reaching, and what we mean for that is reaching for more. It means that sort of tolerance effect. Again, we all recognise that. We've talked about it with caffeine, but it's the same with alcohol and drugs and food, is that over time you need more. So, you've said over the last few years, you've struggled with this. There may have been a time, I guess, for you then, I'm not sure there was ever a time for me, but there may have been a time for you where you could have had 1 or 2 biscuits and put them back in the cupboard, but that over time it became 3 and then 4 and then 5, and that's to get that same hit, if you like, that same, that we've not talked about how that works yet, but how to get that same sort of hit of feel good.
Interestingly, I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but I have a story which exactly relates to this. It's like when I was young, my mum told me this actually. I would look over at my dad's plate at the dinner table and so ask, why has he got more than me? Like that level of being like, I want more. And I think I've always been this way. Yeah, in a way, like, unable to moderate food intake, and only
I think you're in the gang. I think you're in the gang, yeah, definitely.
It was only when I was like in my mid-teens, where I was I became wise to it a little bit more. I started going to the gym, speaking to people that were in good shape, what they did, and emulated that, and kind of just repeated it. But yeah, right. Yes. It took until then for me to really get control of it, I think. Yeah, when you could in a way bring your intellectual powers to solving this problem. Yeah, which was very naive to.
Yeah. So this tolerance problem is R for reaching. A is activities, and this refers to the fact that this is sort of to do with dopamine, which again we haven't talked about yet, but it's a neurotransmitter in the brain, and dopamine's implicated in all the different addictions. So when we have a drink or we eat some cake, or if we were to take drugs, you get a hit of dopamine in the brain, which is a sort of reward motivation neurotransmitter. But one of the problems is that you get a bigger hit than is natural. So we were talking about evolution, weren't we? So the brain likes dopamine, but also it doesn't like it to go too high, really. And that's partly why you get the tolerance thing, because, so I'll go back a step, the brain starts to down-regulate your dopamine receptors, so that actually you have then less dopamine available to you, as your steady state. So then you need to have more to get the same effect, if you like. You have to press harder on the dopamine pedal. So that's why you get the tolerance effect. But it also means that the brain sort of focuses in on the thing that gives it the best dopamine hit. So for you and I, that's sugar and carbohydrates and sort of volume of food. We love that. And over time, what can happen, and it happens to people with other addictions, is that that crowds out other things that would have given them pleasure. So they tend to sort of give up hobbies, give up, doing things that they enjoy. And really all the enjoyment starts to come from thinking about food, planning food. I don't know about you, but I was always a real cook as well. So I'd spend lots of time looking at cookbooks, thinking about food.
I was more of a cook show person. So watch a cooking show, but never actually cook it.
Yeah, looking at my watch, thinking how long till I can start cooking my tea, or or can I go shopping for food? It all became sort of, or your brain sort of really starts focusing on that. So that's activities neglected, because you start neglecting other activities, drawn into this sort of sphere of addiction. V is for volume, so having more than you intended. You've already talked about volume, but eating more, sitting down to a meal and thinking, right, I've got this on my plate, that will be fine, eating that. And then I'm always doing this. There's some leftovers, and I think, I'll just go and tidy those away, I'll just go and finish those off, even though probably I wasn't, still hungry in the traditional sense. So V is for volume. E is for exclusion, and this is talking about the withdrawal effect. So I talked about the withdrawal from caffeine, didn't I? But obviously people get, where people have been drinking a lot, for example, they will get withdrawal symptoms when they stop, or people get withdrawal from nicotine. Mm-hmm. Why it's hard to give up caffeine, etc. So withdrawal symptoms from sugar and carbohydrates, you've already talked about some of them. Shakiness, headaches. I used to get real bad crash migraine if the first day of a diet. I was trying to cut it out, but I felt terrible. People also get gastrointestinal things. They can get mood things, like you feel more anxious or depressed, or so that there are. Go on.
Yeah, sorry. There's just so much that you're saying that's triggering loads of thoughts in my mind. So one of the key reasons why I became interested in nutrition was like nutritional psychiatry. So there's a woman called Dr. Kelly Brogan in the US, and she wrote a book. Her first book was called, I think it's A Mind of Your Own. And she was talking about blood sugar fluctuations throughout the day, and how they can get misdiagnosed. So like generalized anxiety disorder, and actually it's just blood sugar dysregulation.
Yes.
And I was like, opened my mind, right? Because like if I was feeling a little bit low or something and realized like I have these peaks and troughs throughout the day, like why is that? And it was actually just unstable blood sugar. Unstable
blood sugar, yeah. And then you find yourself reaching, I was very, very, I did that whole shaky thing. I can remember as a teenager being really worried about myself, because one time I was like incredibly shaky. But then those things go away when you consume the substance. The same as, if you had alcohol withdrawals and you had a hair of the dog, you feel fine again for a little while. So so the withdrawal thing is, and it's what people, that's what people really struggle with when they're trying to give all this stuff up. You have to be able to sort of get through that, however you can, whether you sort of taper down very slowly, if you can do that. But a lot of us food addicts, we've already talked about, we can't moderate, so it's no good asking us to taper. What we have to do is check it's all right, because we're not on meds, etc. check with your healthcare provider. Don't just go away and do this. If you're not on medication, it's probably going to be fine. You're probably just going to feel terrible. But there are some meds you shouldn't just go cold turkey with carbohydrate on, some diabetes meds and blood pressure meds, for example. But yeah, so I did the whole cold turkey thing. Felt absolutely shocking for about a week after reading that John Briffa book. And then the lights came on day 8. I felt amazing. I felt really, really good. Yeah. So that's the withdrawal. And then just to finish on craved, the last one is damage. And I think this is, in a way, the defining heart of addiction. It's where you continue to use despite knowing it's doing you harm. So there are people who know, for example, that sugar is bad and the carbs are bad for their mental health or their physical health, like they're type 2 diabetic, or they've got a lot of weight to lose. They know it's harming them, but they're powerless to stop. They continue using despite the fact it's doing them damage. So that's deeper damage, and that's obviously it's the same with other addictions where people say with alcohol and they know it's harming their relationships, it's harming their health, it's harming their financial situation, it's might losing their job or whatever, but they can't stop even though they're aware of that. It's a real hallmark of addiction.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating. You can definitely see how the craved can overlay onto like drug abuse, but it also so perfectly onto dietary habits and addiction. Yeah, I know it's unbelievable in a way.
Yeah, and I think it really helps people who are sort of skeptic about the fact that food can be addictive. You go through this with them. So I did it once at the PHC conference. I think it will be still on the PHC YouTube channel, I think, where I gave a talk about food addiction. We got people to stand up if these criteria applied to them, and to count how many applied to them. And it was maybe something to do with the audience there, who are all into the sort of the sort of low carb eating that we've been talking about. But yeah. It was the vast majority of the audience recognised these symptoms in themselves. So it's very, very interesting. I think it's very widespread. I mean, not everybody has all of them or enough to be perhaps classified as an addict, but some people will be harmful users, as we say, like people are with alcohol sometimes. It's not that they're actual addicts, but from time to time, or for whatever reason, they've just got in some bad habits. They've maybe been going through a period of stress and their eating's like, really, really messed up, and they have some of these symptoms, so they can sort of pull back. And then there's other people like your partner there who, then it's never gonna happen because they don't have that drive, they don't have that.
Yeah, and the thing is, she might have a craving, but it's quickly satisfied. Do you know what I mean? By like that biscuit or a small bowl of crisps or something. And I couldn't do that at all. It's quite funny. I've got a specific example I'd like to get your thoughts on, and then maybe dive into the barriers of why it's so hard for people to change these and what we can do to help. So kind of practical steps. So some people have a different, how do I structure this question? Everyone has a different Achilles heel, right? In terms of addiction. Some people, or like a certain group of people I know, love crisps, right? But what is it that drives people towards certain foods over others from a psychological perspective? Is there one?
Do you know what? I thought where you were going with that, which is another really important point about addiction, is that they tend because they all happen in this reward center in the brain, they tend to interact. So there is an addiction interaction disorder, and often
let's dive into that.
Yeah, often sugar is the gateway drug, and there's actually again on YouTube a video of Eric Clapton talking about this, because he had a lot of problems with drugs, but he talked about how sugar was his gateway drug, and that as a kid, he was like us, all the sugar. But then that led into other addictions. And so you can often find, so we all know as well that effect. People give up smoking, they put on weight, don't they? Because they're eating more sweets, trying to still get that hit. You know, they're eating polos and jelly beans and things like that. Or the same when people give up alcohol, they often turn to sugar to get that same hit. So there is this interrelationship between the addictions, genetically as well. It's quite a common thing when I interview someone with a food addiction that they had a parent who had an alcohol problem. Often women had fathers who had alcohol problems. It's not everybody, but there is a bit of a genetic component. So I thought that's where you were going with that.
No, but that's really interesting because it shows you like addictive behaviours can overlap onto food as well. So it's not just if you someone who's prone to get addiction. So someone that is prone to get addicted to, I don't know, smoking, alcohol, whatever, are more likely to get addicted to certain foods as well. Yeah. That makes perfect sense.
It's to do with this sort of dopamine hit, the serotonin, the other things that go on, are common pathways in the addiction side of things. Yeah, so you're asking why people get... Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of reasons for that. And some of them are maybe a little bit more psychological, that... that they're the things that we find comforting or we associate with. So this is more my proper territory, really, isn't it? So maybe as a child, I don't know about you, but so I'm a bit older than you. So luckily, in a way for me, when I grew up, there weren't all the ultra processed foods. It wasn't as available. It wasn't, you couldn't. We were quite limited in terms of access to sweets and crisps and things like that. And we had this system at home. I don't know if it was common at the time, but on a Friday night, you could have a choose of a can of fizzy pop and either a little chocolate thing or a packet of crisps. So we waited for Friday to come round so we could have this can of lemonade and this packet of crisps. So you can get this association, obviously, with pleasant memories, pleasant feelings, habits that form very young, where you associate, so for me, cheese and onion crisps, that takes me right back to watching wrestling with my dad. And, that was that's a happy thing. Or, for some people, it's a certain kind of biscuit, I guess, because that's what they had as children. So there can be those sorts of links. And then I think the rest of it is probably just more about that taste, that some people really like the savoury type things and some people really like the sweet things.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So if you kind of have a connection to a certain food or it's connected to a memory, that is a big thing. Because I've read about like smell being really, that can trigger certain memories in your brain and things like that. People baking bread and reminds them of a time in their youth or whatever. And
this goes back to the dopamine thing, reward and motivation. Your brain really sort of imprints not just the flavour, but you're right, but all of the things that sort of surround that experience. So where there's a certain colour on the packaging or the smell or even the sound of the packet. Like I can hear people opening packages in the kitchen. I don't know about you, and I'm thinking, what are they eating? What are they eating? I have to go and have a look. That crinkly noise or the snap or all of that sensory information is encoded and embedded. So that when we encounter any of those triggers, the brain's already releasing dopamine, which is already making the cravings come. So you go to the cinema, you see the Ben and Jerry's sign, you're already drooling because you've had it before and you got that dopamine hit, and the dopamine starts, and you kind of, before you know it, you're walking towards the Ben and Jerry's stand and getting your double scoop with the. Not that I ever did that, of course. No, I did. But just to give people examples, and that's how you can really get fixated on certain things. I know somebody who was her thing was Terry's chocolate oranges, and she used to buy them from Costco or somewhere, and she had like 50 Terry's chocolate oranges under the bed. That was just her one thing, and it was like a comfort at night, to have this Terry's chocolate orange associated with relaxation, end of the day, watching the telly, and then it just becomes more and more of a habit. So that's the That's the
habit forming
side of things.
So, okay, well, we've covered a lot, and I'm conscious time is getting on.
We can have part 2 another time.
Yeah, but when we've talked about habits and these addictive properties to certain foods and food associations and things like that, for people that recognize them and want to change them, what do you see from a psychological perspective the biggest barriers to change or to healthy lifestyle change?
Yes, I think these days the food environment is utterly crazy. You know, the things that we're bombarded with all the time, you know, the sugars, the cakes, it's everywhere. It's at work, it's at the garage. You know, you have to walk down those aisles in the supermarket. And I think it's so normalized. I don't know when we'll all wake up, but it's just so normal that every possible sort of event in the calendar is really just a festival of sugar. So I reel off a few examples. Birthdays. Most people can't imagine having a birthday without a cake. Christmas, don't get me started. Valentine's Day, Mother's Day. All of these things involve a box of chocolates or a cake or a meal out, and that's a blowout. Holidays. So it's become, I mean, partly due to advertising, I think this idea that you kind of almost can't have a good time, or, you know, you should definitely treat yourself, you're worth it, those kinds of messages. And I think those are really now completely embedded in our psyche. So it is hard for people to change these habits, and it's quadruply hard for people like you and I that have that real draw and that pull towards them. We really have to work at bringing good food into the house, cooking good food, you know, eating good food, and focusing on that and resisting all these other temptations.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good point, because we live in I guess people classify it as an obesogenic environment. The idea that, you know, ultra processed foods are so readily available and so hyper palatable that they are addictive in that sense, and very easily to overconsume, as you and me know all too well. And that, I guess, is a huge barrier itself. So I guess the first element would be addressing this particular issue, or your Achilles heel, as I referred to it before, and then not buying it. One thing.
Fantastic advice. And I say that in the book, you know, step 1 is get rid of all the stuff that's in your house that's, you know, you can't moderate, or, you know, you shouldn't, it's ultra processed, or it's high in sugar, or whatever it is. Now, if other people live in the house, it's a bit difficult. So I think your partner probably wouldn't be very impressed, but there's things you can do in the environment to make that easier for yourself. So you can have your own cupboard for a while, or you can have your own shelf in the fridge for a while. You can talk to the people in the house and say, you know, I know you want to have your little bowl of crisps in the evening, or whatever it is that person wants to keep in their life. Can you please store that out of my sight? Because seeing it and hearing it is certainly, in the first few weeks, I'm all right now. I can watch someone have a packet of crisps, and I'll have a sort of, you know, a wistful longing. But I would never eat a packet of crisps now, because that habit of not eating crisps is so embedded. So if you can ask people at home to help you keep it out of sight and out of mind, yeah, and then don't bring it in the house. If they want to eat junk, they're entirely responsible for their own junk buying. And if they're kids, why would you want to feed them? People will say, well, what about the kids? What? Why would you want to feed your kids junk and make them into a food addict like you are? You wouldn't, would you? I've got 4 grandchildren. I never give them cake or sweets. We give them books. We play games with them. You know, whatever. Do other things that don't always use food as a reward for you. It's not food is nourishment. It shouldn't be a reward or a celebration or a cheer you up thing. Those other things can serve that function.
Yeah, that's such a good way of looking at it. Such a good way, because you were so right when you identified that we associate celebrations with food, or vice versa.
Christmas is so hard for people when they first start. All of these things are hard. It's hard when you first start, and it's a lifelong project. So for people like you and I, yes, we can be doing well, but it takes quite a lot of energy to keep there. And that's why you do need that community. You do need that support. You do need to understand it's not your fault. It's just the way you are, but it is the way you are. So you're going to have to work at it. And certainly in the early days, you'll slip and fall. I'm sure you did. I have many times, even since I knew this information, because of the power of that the neuropsychology that goes on and the habits and so on. It step by step, little by slow, we have to haul ourselves out, and and keep doing all the things that are going to keep us as solidly as possible in recovery. And there's so much to talk about there as well.
Because I guess I do, because I will eat. So if I'm going out with friends and we have dinner together, I might share a dessert. It's very rarely that I get one to myself. But I can do that now and it'd be okay. But if I did that earlier in the day and had something sweet at breakfast, for example, I would crave those foods throughout the day. So actually in the evening after dinner is when I can probably get away with it the most, which is quite interesting in and of itself. But that works for me.
Exactly.
And I don't do it every day.
So some people may be able to do that. A rock bottom food addict probably couldn't get away with that. So because you've really understood it, the rest of your diet's really good. You can get up the next day and just go back to your normal routine. Some people that would trigger, but again, it's so unique, and we all learn that, and you have to learn it several times. Like me with so peanut butter was a thing. I still really love peanut butter, and I think, it's fine, it's low carb.
I've got some in my cupboard.
Buy a jar of peanut butter, put it in the cupboard. Yeah, this time, I'm just going to have a little bit on some carrot sticks or whatever. No, the whole jar would go. So I had to. And about 6 months later, I'd probably think, oh yeah, I'll be all right now. I'll be all right. So now I never do that. But these are all learning experiences, and it just goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning about everyone's unique, their own kind of drug foods are unique, and how much you can sort of nudge your borderlines is unique. So if I go out for a meal and there's a little bit of cheese in it or a few nuts on it, again, that's fine. I'll be all right. As long as I don't come home and start eating cheese and nuts, I'd be all right. But if I have them in the house, I can't moderate them. So that would be one of my personal kind of boundaries.
So for someone who's struggling with weight loss, for example, let's use this example, and they're looking to change their lifestyle for a better. We've identified not buying it in the supermarket, getting it out of your home. What's a thing that they can do to help them control those kinds of cravings and things of that nature?
Yeah. So again, going back to the proper human diet, and really as a baseline to focus on getting, probably starting with 3 meals a day. Not everybody sticks to that in the long run. Sometimes they go down to 2. Like I don't eat breakfast, but that again, that's a unique thing. But start with having enough protein and enough fat that your body isn't actually craving stuff that it needs. It's not craving nutrition, at least, so you can sort of drown out, and you're not you shouldn't be hungry. That's not sustainable for anyone, is it? Just like white knuckling it through hunger. It's bad enough having to white knuckle it through the sort of crazy cravings. So so the food is the foundation, really. You're getting enough, you're not hungry, you're getting that solid, and then maintaining the abstinence from these things that you crave. So really learning about shopping and food prep, and making sure you're eating enough. Maybe you have to take stuff with you, make sure you have something at work if you're a working person, or if you're traveling, you're going to have to pack something up. So there is quite a lot of thinking and preparation and behavior change that has to go into, keeping that recovery going. So that's like step number 1, if you like. But then, of course, because we're taking away people's comfort, they also, the other big part of the picture is bringing in things that are going to get them dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, oxytocin, which are all the feel-good neurotransmitters, get those in other ways. So the biggest bang for your buck is some sort of exercise activity. When you say exercise, people sometimes go, you know, but it could just literally walking is fantastic. Walking outside in the sunshine will give you all of those feel-good neurotransmitters. Walking and exercise, absolutely perfect for mental health and for, you know, stabilizing your blood sugars. And so any kind of exercise is good. Yoga is perfect as well. You know, doing things that you enjoy. I'm a knitter. You can see the wool up there. I love that. When you're knitting, you can't be eating because you'd mess it up. So I'm using my hands, knitting. That it's mindful. It takes my thoughts off food. Find something like that you love, some sort of a hobby that you've given up, or used to like when you were younger. You know, go back to something like that that's gonna give you that social connection. Being in a community that are trying to achieve the same thing is incredibly powerful. Being part of that group process is another really important part of recovery.
I love those tips. Those are awesome. I have one. I know we're coming up in time, and I always ask everyone that comes on the show 3 questions. But before I ask them, I have one more question, and this is a question which I've been thinking of throughout this podcast. And you can correct me if this is not relevant, but it seems to me like with any chronic disease, food addiction and everything associated with it is multifactorial. Genetics predisposing someone towards fat gain or addictive properties, etc., and the way like we partition nutrients and things like that. But it seems to me that Maslow's hierarchy of needs can be a major factor in this case. So in a sense that if one of those levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is compromised, and I'll link to a graphic in the show notes for people to look at if you don't know what this is. If one of these levels is compromised, for example, the loss of a loved one or, you know, a breakup, health will be deprioritized, and therefore you'll have a blip. What are your thoughts on this? And is there any way we can help ameliorate the problem?
Totally. And another sort of aspect of the whole thing we've not talked about is trauma and how that affects the brain, you know, particularly when we're younger or, you know, even later on. And then that, you know, we talked about sugar being the gateway drug. You know, often for kids in difficult situations, sugar's the only soothy thing that they have available to them. And often I have talked to people, you know, who've had quite a difficult starts in life, and that was it really was their coping mechanism. Definitely trauma, loss, you know, that those can, I think in those of us with that tendency already, you know, that can tip you. It's not the original cause. I think probably most of us that are going to be this way out are born this way out. Mm-hmm. But I think it can definitely worsen things and speed it along and make it more difficult to get to that place where you can get into recovery. And again, those people in our groups who've been going through stressful things will definitely struggle more. You know, those of them maybe going through a divorce or a loss of a job or some sort of bereavement, they're really going to struggle more than people who are in a sort of, you know, they've got that stable psychosocial picture going on. So it does all connect.
Right. And in that instance, would you look at soothing or dealing with the problem that has occurred, whether it's like in going through the trauma of losing a loved one, for example, the mourning phase, before dealing with the kind of nutritional health element? How would you tackle that problem?
Yeah.
Did I articulate that well enough?
Yeah, you did. I know what you're saying. It's a little bit unique, but usually within a year of a bereavement, you wouldn't want to be trying to do something like, you know, make a major change or, you know, So I'd probably, again, depending on the individual circumstances, I'd probably say, you know, do the grieving, you know, and if you need some support with that, get that, and if you want to do this work, you know, maybe come back when that's a little bit more resolved, because that will be difficult. But having said that, and you were talking about people with mental health problems and how that can be normalized when you get the food right. So we always say, you know, really in recovery, the food does come first. You have to do that first, because you don't know what's left over mental health or other problems wise until you've eliminated all that stuff and you've got your biochemistry sort of you know, treated or more level, because you may find that a lot of the emotional problems just completely resolve, like you were saying. So you know, don't be going into therapy, if you like, until we know what's let's do the sugar addiction stuff first, and then if there's other emotional things left, then maybe you need to go and talk to someone about that. But you know, let's get the the foundations right, you know, the proper human diet, let's get that going on, because there's this incredible connection. I hope that's what people have picked up between what you eat and how your brain works, you know, memory, mood, all of these things.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for answering that. I feel we've covered a heck of a lot. But I have three quick questions to ask you that I ask everyone that comes on the show, with the first being, what is the most impactful health change that you have made in your life and why?
So I think that's probably reasonably obvious that it would be giving up sugar, grains and ultra-processed foods. You know, sugar probably being the chief of those. So that's got to be the biggest. But then obviously you've heard all the other things that I've given up as well. Caffeine, alcohol, nuts and dairy. So they've all had their effect, but sugar would have been the biggest for sure.
Brilliant. And another one, how can healthcare become more integrated with the kind of modalities that we spoke about today?
I think it's just about getting the word out, getting people trained. If we can get people interested in at least bearing in mind that people may be suffering with this problem. They've got, you know, they've heard about Crave there, you know, and then the advice isn't moderation, which is the standard advice. So for those of us that have tried, you know, with all good faith, moderation, and it's not working, maybe there's another path, and maybe healthcare provide, maybe people could be more open to that and to supporting their patients, you know, in a sort of abstinence journey. So on the Public Health Collaboration website, we've got some pages called Food Addiction Resources, and there's pages there for professionals to go and look at. It's got a screen up there, and it's also got you know, information about food addiction, so that you'd hopefully feel a little bit more empowered to support somebody who you thought may have this problem.
Excellent. I will link to that in the show notes for everyone. And last but not least, actually, let me repeat that. I've got one last question for you, Jen, but before I ask it, can you please tell the listeners where they can find you and what exciting projects you have coming up?
Oh, yes. Right. So I mostly hang around on Twitter in terms of social media. So it's at Jen_Unwin. I'll never catch up with the number of followers that David's got, but I would appreciate it more. Yeah, so that's me on Twitter. I run a Clubhouse, which people might be interested in. I don't know if you've come across Clubhouse. It's a social media app on your phone. And I run a Clubhouse every Wednesday at 6 p.m. It's called Fork in the Road, and we have guests or we have a topic, and I have other people on there with me. We're talking about broadly these kinds of issues. And we've actually got Vinny Tortorich tonight. I'm really excited. And you can listen to replays as well. So if anyone wants to go on Clubhouse, follow me. Same, it's at Jen_Unwin, or follow the club Fork in the Road. You can hear all our back episodes, as well as come and join in and talk to us. It's another way for people to connect sort of community wise. I've got a food addiction weekend coming up at the end of March. I'm not sure when this is going out. And we've got a 4-day intensive in May with Bitt and Johnson. I do believe there's a couple of places left for that, so people could get in touch with me. And we've got a 1-day conference on food addiction, May the 20th in Bristol.
Brilliant.
Followed by, on the 19th, 20th, the Public Health Collaboration conference, which is always brilliant. So come and say hello. No bias. David will be there. I'll be there. There'll be lots of interesting people there speaking, and we get to all talk together. It's really fun. In terms of future, just more of the same, really. We're doing this research, as I say, so I hope to publish that. And just watch this space for more. Follow me on Twitter for more either weekends or other courses that are coming up, both for professionals and members of the public.
Brilliant. I will link to everything. Ooh.
Buy the book, Fork in the Road. All profits to the Public Health Collaboration. All my wisdom is in Fork in the Road.
Brilliant. I will link to everything, including your book, in the show notes. And last but not least, Jen, can you please provide the listeners with 3 quick tips to help improve their health and well-being from today?
Right, from today. So obviously be mindful of your sugar, flour and ultra-processed food intake, and and the habits around those, and try and if it feels like the right thing for you, to try and cut those down. So much less sugar, I think, makes a massive difference to people's overall health and mental health. So that has to be number 1 for me, doesn't it? I think I kind of had 4. I was finding it hard to cut down. I think home learning, if you don't, cooking stuff from fresh at home. So, I mean, basically the main thing is eat real food cooked at home. Don't buy ultra processed stuff. It's as quick, I think, like to cook yourself a piece of fish and some vegetables is as quick as, getting it out of the packet and putting it in the, so buy fresh, buy local, and cook and prepare and take stuff to work. Don't eat things with industrial seed oils and sugars and things added to them. So things out of packets, things not in packets. So that would be one. And another one is, to get some kind of movement in your day as a habit, make it a habit, and notice the difference that makes to your physical and mental health. So some sort of movement like walking or yoga or something, and really make time for yourself for that. Again, if you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, what were we eating? What were we doing? We were eating just real natural foods in their natural state, and we were doing a lot of physical activity. And it's not that long in evolutionary terms since that's how we were living.
Absolutely. Those were brilliant. Thank you so much. Jen, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you, and I really do hope that we can do this again soon.
You definitely can. I really appreciate it, and I've really enjoyed it as well.
Thank you for listening to the Functional Health Podcast. You can find links to everything that we talked about today in the show notes. If you have a second, please consider leaving a 5-star rating on iTunes. It really does make a huge difference and helps get this valuable information out and reach more people. Don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date and know whenever I release a new episode. You can connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, or our website, and all questions are welcome. As always, thanks to Josh Aurelia for all the editing, and thank you all for your support.